Welcome back, everyone. Today I started playing in the second round of the America's Cup here in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, as you guys know, I won my first round matchup against Samuel Sevian, and in the second round, I was paired against Leinier Dominguez, originally from Cuba, now representing the United States. So first game, as I'm the higher rated player, I am starting with the white pieces. So let's dive right into the game. So the game starts with e4 here, and now we get pawn to e5. And I play this move knight to f3, and Leinier plays this move knight to f6. Now this obviously is a Petrov defense. I was sort of expecting it, also not expecting it, really not sure what I was gonna get. Having said that, there are so many variations and I simply wanted to keep it simple, or as we like to say, there's the basic acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid. So I played knight takes e5, d6, and now I play this move knight to d3. Now this move has been played many times. I think the first time it came to prominence was when Wesley So played, I believe, against Fabiano Caruana here in St. Louis some years back. I think that's the first time we saw top grandmasters playing this move. Now it's a very awkward looking move, putting the knight in front of this d pawn. However, the idea here is that you want to push this pawn forward after you move the knight to f4. So here we get knight takes e4 being played by Leinier. I play this move queen to e2, pinning the knight, and now he plays this move queen to e7. Now by playing queen e7, black breaks the pin here, and I can't really win the knight. If black were to play a move like d5, for example, then I can go f3, simply winning the knight on e4. So we get queen to e7. Now I play this move knight to f4, and there's a very nasty threat. If black plays, let's just say, a random move like pawn to a5, I can now go knight to d5, forking the queen and the pawn. If you move the queen back to d8 to guard this pawn on c7, I simply gobble the knight for free on e4, and I win the game. If black plays queen to e5, trying to protect the knight, then I take this pawn, forking the king and the rook, and it's a complete disaster as white is winning here. So Dominguez instead decides to play this move knight to f6, retreating the knight and offering a classic queen trade. Here I play pawn to d4, and now Dominguez wastes no time in swapping the queens. If black were to play a move like knight c6, developing the knight, this looks like a very natural move, but I can actually go bishop to e3 here, preventing the trade of the queens, and white is significantly better because once black, say, develops a bishop, I go knight to c3, castles, and I can play this move d5, knight to e5, and just castle myself out of the center of the board. And even though both sides are castled here, white has a lot more threats towards the queen side here, and white should be significantly better. So Dominguez trades the queens right away, and now he goes knight to c6. I play this move c3, building a classic connect 3. He plays pawn to d5 here. I go bishop f3, and now he goes knight to e7, simply guarding his pawn on d5 with both of D's knights. Now I play h4 here, and here Dominguez goes into his first think in the game. Up to this point, pretty standard. Mind you, it is pretty drawish, symmetrical pawn structure here. So it should be pretty equal. That being said, white has a little bit more space, and additionally, I have this great knight on f4. Dominguez plays h5 here, stopping me from potentially playing h5 and keeping it very, very symmetrical. Now I play this move pawn to g3. Now, before the game, I had actually looked at something a little bit different, but I decided to play g3 simply because if I play a move like knight to d2 or castles, black can play this move bishop to g4, and even though the computer still likes it for white as you let the depth get a little bit deeper, bishops are coming off the board, and due to the symmetrical pawn structure, let's say knight to2 and c6, it's pretty hard to prove anything. As you guys can tell, the pawns are simply completely symmetrical here for both sides. So instead I played g3, sort of audibling, to use a football term, where I changed the line that I intend to play during the game on the fly. Now the reason for this is quite simple. Now when black plays this move bishop to g4, for example, I can simply go bishop to g2, keeping the bishops on the board. So Dominguez plays bishop f5, I castle, he castles queenside, I play rook to e1, taking this open file for my rook, and now he plays c6, creating the connect 3 himself. Here I play this move knight to d2. Now, I could have played this a4 move, and mind you, the computer actually thinks it's the best move, but I wasn't really sure what the plan is. If I play a4, what is the difference between playing a4 or knight d2 and then a4? And simply put, after knight g6, I didn't really see a good continuation. I thought I would have to trade off knights on g6, play something like bishop g5, and after rook to e8, I didn't really see a big way to claim an advantage. It's interesting the computer gives me a big advantage after knight d2. I guess after bishop e7, it thinks that with a5, white is better. Again, low depth, this isn't a supercomputer, hard to really judge how good this is. During the game, I couldn't really figure out why this should be great. It looks like white maybe has a small advantage, but black doesn't really have any major weaknesses here, so I simply didn't believe it. So instead I played knight to d2. Dominguez plays knight g6 anyway, trying to trade the knights. It's worth noting, however, white does have a little bit more space with his knight on f4 as well as the open e file. Black has a few weaknesses potentially, so he wants to trade off pieces. So of course I reject the trade and I go knight to g2. Dominguez plays bishop to d6, and now I play this move knight to e3 here, attacking the bishop on f5. Ideally, what I was looking for here was what was the optimal setup of the pieces. As you can tell, the bishop on c1 and rook on a1 are not really in the game. So what I sort of conclude is that if I go knight to f1, for example, here, let's say rook e8, knight e3, bishop d7 is played. White is maybe a little bit better here, but it's kind of hard to play because my knight on g2 doesn't really have any good squares. So the concept that I thought of during the game is I thought, well, if I put this knight on e3 and let's say black moves the bishop back to d7, for example, I thought that I could play bishop to d1 here, and after rook to e8, go bishop c2. And if black plays a move like, let's just say king c7, I thought that maybe I can even go knight to f3 and knight to g5. And these knights are really, really well placed on these two central squares. So this is sort of the setup that I was envisioning. In an endgame, it's much easier to sort of envision a setup than with all the pieces kind of on the board like queens as opposed to an endgame. In endgames, you're sort of trying to figure out what are the optimal piece placements. So this is what I sort of conclude is that I want to put this knight on f3 as opposed to putting a knight on e3, because a knight on g2, if it can't go to f4, the only available square will be e3. So I played knight to e3. Dominguez goes rook d8, pinning the knight here. If I capture the bishop, I lose the rook, and with it, I lose the game. So I go pawn to a4 now, and he plays this great move, knight g4, trading off some knights. In retrospect, I kind of felt like maybe I should have played bishop to d1 here first to go knight f3 or knight f1, because once I go a4, knight g4, now I can't avoid a pair of knights coming off the board. So I play knight df1, he takes, I take back with a knight. Now again, I have a great knight on e3, it's targeting the pawn on d5, the bishop on f5, and I'm still keeping an eye on the pawn on h5 as well. So it feels like overall, I should have a small advantage. Now here, Dominguez surprised me when he played this move bishop to d3. I thought in this position he should play bishop to e4, or even frankly just bishop to d7, and I really wasn't sure why it should be all that much better. I was going to play bishop d2, but after knight e7 and knight f5, even though the computer still thinks white is significantly better, which is kind of interesting, I didn't really see how I'm supposed to avoid a trade of the knights long term. Let's say I go king g2 and g6, followed by knight f5. It felt like it can't really be all that much. So when he played bishop d3, I was a little bit surprised, because now when I played bishop g2, it starts to get a little bit tricky here. Now, first glance, you're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? You retreated the bishop. You're not even targeting the pawn at h5. How can this be a scary move? Now, the reason that this is a scary move is that in this position, after bishop d3, if I play rook d1, black can play bishop to e4 here, and let's just say I go bishop e2, for example. Black can now play this very tricky move f5, and I have to play f4 to stop black from pushing the pawn and ruining my pawn structure, and now black has this really nice bishop on e4 in the long run. So by going bishop to g2, what I'm threatening to do here is, let's say black now goes king to c7, and I play rook d1. Black cannot go back to this f5 square because I capture the bishop. And if you go to e4, now I can play f3, and the bishop is actually completely trapped here on the central e4 square. So it's a very weak wooden shield. So when I go bishop g2, the main point is that I want to be able to meet bishop e4 with f3, trapping the bishop. Additionally, after Dominguez plays knight e7, I go rook d1. You'll notice that the problem for black is now the bishop cannot really stay on this diagonal from f5, or from c8, I should say, to h3, because if we go back a few moves, if you put the bishop on d7 or e6, you'll notice the bishop has great scope here. But once bishop g2 happens, let's just say you play a move like king c7, or sorry, not king c7, let's say you play a move like knight to e7, I can now play rook to d1, and you can go to f5, which is similar to the game, but let's just say you don't. To illustrate the point, you go bishop to g6 here, for example. Now I can play a move like bishop to h3, king to c7, and b3 followed by c4. And you'll notice that the bishop on g6 is staring at an empty diagonal here, whereas my bishop on h3 is placed perfectly to try to push for c4, but also stopping black from either putting the knight or the bishop on f5 here. So I feel like this should be a little bit better for white already. Whereas if we go back here, you'll notice that my bishop on f3 is really, it's quite decent. It kind of keeps an eye on the pawn, but it's not really doing a whole lot as far as the central pawn chain is concerned. Whereas this bishop on f5, it controls all these critical squares. But once the bishop has to go off that diagonal potentially, and I can claim it, it gets really tricky for black to play. So after rook to d1, Leinier is sort of feeling the pressure, decided to play bishop f5 here, and this is a fairly serious mistake, because now when I take, I have two bishops versus a bishop and a knight, which should give white a significant advantage. That being said, it is still very tricky. Now at this point, I was up a lot of time on the clock. I was up about 30 minutes here, and I was feeling pretty good, but it's still not easy to prove, because if I don't do something right away, and let's just say I play like b3, king c7, bishop b2, and black can play something like g6 here, Black's knight is very, very solid on f5. I mean, maybe I can eventually go c4 and claim a small advantage, but it's not easy to come up with a straightforward plan, whereas black just sort of sits and waits, and I'm the one who has to prove something. So I decided to play b4. Now, I played this move for a couple of reasons. First of all, I played it on instinct more than anything else. I thought that playing for b4, b5 made more sense than trying to play for b3 and c4. I simply felt that due to the time advantage, I should play b4 and try to complicate it versus going for something much slower like b3, where black basically will try to create a setup. Let's just say rook to e2, for example, bishop to d2, and then something like g6. And eventually, I'm going to be able to play for c4. Let's say I go like bishop f1, rook to e4, bishop d3, let's say rook to e7. I can eventually try to push for c4, maybe king g2 followed by c4 next move, but it's not clear how easily I can do that. And because Dominguez was so far down on the clock, it felt like playing for something slow and positional where he's going to react to every move that I play wasn't the right strategy. So I decided to play b4 now. This is actually a great move, but there are potentially some drawbacks. The first big drawback is that once I go b4, playing for c4 is not really an option. And if black can somehow get the knight to d6 and even go to c4, he creates a nice little bastion with that knight there. And white's bishop on b2 is pretty terrible behind these three pawns. So after b4, he does go bishop c7 here, hoping to play knight d6. Now I play bishop h3. He goes g6, and here I make a big mistake. In this position, I play this move king to f1. Now, what I should have played here is I actually should have played this move b5. Now, the reason I didn't play this move is I thought that after a move like rook to e2, creating the kebab with the rook on the 7th rank, I can play something like bishop d2, king d7, and I didn't really see how it's breaking through after, say, rook b1 and rook b8. So if I trade the pawns on c6, we'll be trading rooks. I don't really have any pawn pushes in the center here either. And so I simply didn't see a quick, clear-cut plan to progress forward in the game. Now, as it turns out, this position is actually really, really good for me because I can simply play this quiet waiting move king to g2 followed by king f3. And the issue for black here is he can't really move anything. You can't really move the rook away because then I can always trade and go rook b7, creating my own kebab on the 7th rank. So you can't really move the rook away. You don't really want to move the rook from e2 either because it's keeping an eye on this bishop. So let's say you do play rook e8. Now I can even play something like rook c1 followed by c4, opening up the b and the c files. And this is really, really good for white. Now, of course, with a weaker engine, it's not as clear-cut, but having had an opportunity to look very briefly after the game, the computers do give white a significant advantage here. So black can't really move either rook. You can't really move the knight. You don't really want to move the king. I mean, maybe you can move the king, although I guess after king e7, king f1, rook to e6, something bad is going to happen here because I can trade and go rook b1, and again, I'm infiltrating on the 7th rank. So black just simply can't move any pieces. You can't move the rooks, can't move the king, you can't move the bishop either because then you will lose the rook on b8 when you capture backwards. So black is simply tied down, and mostly in effect, he's in Zugzwang. So the computer at deep depth, at a fairly deep depth does give white a significant advantage after this move b5. Now, as I said, I saw the move, but I didn't see a clear-cut plan, so I tried to go for something much more concrete, but unfortunately, it just doesn't work. I played king to f1. He goes king f8, and now this is the last moment where I could have tried to play b5, but here it's a little bit different, because after takes and knight to d6, now the knight is quite active. I have a weak pawn on b5. He also has two jumps to the e4 and the c4 square, so this knight is very good on d6, and already here, maybe the computer gives white some kind of weird advantage after b6, but almost impossible for a human to find. So instead, I change plans and I take the knight on f5 and I give Leinier the two double pawns on f7 and f5 and I play rook d3. But unfortunately in this position, black can play f4 here. If black wasn't able to play a move like f4, say he plays a move like rook g8 and I get the rook on f3 here, I'm simply winning because when black plays f4, I'll take and I keep my pawn chain of 3 intact. Unfortunately, after f4, I have no choice but to take here. And unfortunately, now I'm up a pawn, but it's a double pawn. And more importantly, it also closes off this f file for my rook. So even if I get the rook to f3, I have a pawn in the way and it can't target anything on the f file. So after takes, Dominguez plays rook to g8. And here I missed maybe my last opportunity to keep the game alive with this move f3. F3 is a move here because after rook to G3, I can play this move rook to E1 here, for example. And if black plays a move like rook G8 and I get rook to E3, maybe there's some chances to create counterplay here. Computer doesn't really buy it though. And with black having active rooks, it's very, very hard to prove anything. But perhaps I should have tried this anyway. Instead, I played this move rook G3, and when I played this move, I actually simply misevaluated what was happening in the endgame here. I forgot that after takes and F5, even though I'm up a pawn here, this is a complete draw. Because if I go rook to E1 trading, you can do the math. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Extra pawn for white. White should be winning. Unfortunately, after this move b5, you'll notice that even though I have the extra pawn, this is simply a complete draw here because black can wait on f7, and the only way for me to create a passed pawn is with g4, but this actually would be losing because black can take and bring the king up to h5 with a protected passed pawn, and he's simply winning. Additionally, my king has no entry squares. I can't get the king around. All these pawns cover the critical squares, and it's just a dead draw. So I played this move king to f2 here. He goes king c7. I try a5 again. If I go rook e1, at any moment he will just swap and play b5. So I play a5 here trying to stop it, but unfortunately after rook e4 there's nothing I can do. I played rook b1 trying to create an open file with b5 here. Dominguez correctly plays a6 stopping it, and now I really just don't have anything. If I could force black to say move the rook from e4 to e8, I actually have some winning chances potentially with this move c4, because if I can activate the rook there will be some pressure on the 5th rank. It's kind of funny the computer still thinks this might be a draw, but at any rate, black doesn't have to move the rook. So when Dominguez plays king d6, now I can't go c4 because then I hang the juicer. And I can't play b5, can't play c4, can't play g4. There's just nothing I can do here. So I play rook c2, king e6, and now I just decide to call it a day by playing this move rook to e2. Simply, I don't see any other ideas. So we trade the rooks. Dominguez plays king d7, I go king d2, and sort of I dilly-dally, bring the king over. Eventually, I do play c4. It's worth noting there's one other big problem in this endgame, though, that I can't understate, which is that if I ever can go g4, and just to illustrate it, forget about the evaluation, black is always queening before I queen. So whenever I push my pawn and he pushes his pawn, black is always the one who queens first. So any ideas I have of maybe even something on the queen side really aren't going to work because black will make the queen first and win the game. So here I go c4, Dominguez plays king c7, and now again I play king c3, trade, and I try b5. Here Dominguez takes the pawn, and I go king b4, and he has king c6. But unfortunately, in this position, it's white's move. If it were Dominguez's move here, this position would be winning. Basically, it comes down to who's in Zugzwang. If it's black's move, black loses. If it's white's move, it's a draw. Just to illustrate the point, let's say I go here, he blunders, and we get this position. This wins because now black can't stop me from entering with the king. If you go king d6 takes and king c7, then I run over this way. I gobble all the pawns on the 5th rank, and it's very straightforward. And if you try to go here, then I can go king b6, king c8, and even king c5 again wins. But basically, black can't stop you from entering on b6 or c5. It's also worth noting in this position after b5, this is still a draw if you play king c7, because when I go king b4 and king d6, takes, there's still no entry for the king here. And as long as you make sure that I can't go to either of these squares, the game will be a draw. But Dominguez, of course, doesn't need to do this. He takes, I go king b4, king c6, and now we just make a threefold repetition. Basically, we just keep repeating with the moves here. Of course, not king c6, because then king b4 wins. So after king d7, the game does end in a draw, which is definitely a little bit disappointing. I had maybe one moment there with that b5 move where perhaps I could have won the game. That being said, it wasn't an obvious win, and I didn't really see how to proceed. So I can't be too unhappy, even though I did have that one opportunity. That being said, a draw is still a good result. So we move forward. Tomorrow I will play my second game of this mini match against Leinier Dominguez. He will have the white pieces, I will have the black pieces. If that game ends in a draw, we will progress to tie breaks. If I win, I'm through. If I lose, I will be relegated to the elimination bracket. So we will see what happens. At any rate, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this recap. I'm trying to do it as quickly as I can. And it's a little bit unfortunate, a little bit disappointed, but you know what? Chess is chess, and we move forward to tomorrow, so I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already, and we'll be back tomorrow with a recap after my second game of the second match against Leinier Dominguez here in the America's Cup in St. Louis, Missouri. See you guys soon. Bye.